Hello, everyone. It's good to be here. Thank you to the ASF team for inviting me to share my work. It's a combination of my research, but also what's happening in Kenya the last 1 year or the last 2 years. So I tried my level best to combine those two. For those who know me, know that fish is my topic. I drink fish, I eat fish, so if you hear a lot about it, don't worry, that's who I am. And this topic for today, I'll be talking about navigating global governance and human security issues, looking specifically at Kenyan fisheries and the women there. So a lot of what I'll be talking today is about my work in Kenya and what's happening there in terms of the governance in the space. To start us off, Kenya, like many other African countries, it has been blessed with so many natural resources. And these are resources such as coastal and riverine and water bodies. And like many other countries like Ghana or Nigeria that have shorelines, there's a lot of women and men who are involved in this particular space. So I'll be talking a lot about this, but giving a case example of Kenya. So in Kenya, we have three main resources. These are natural resources, the fisheries. We have marine resources, which are the coastline, the Indian Ocean. We have a large, vast area on the Indian Ocean. We have the inland capture fisheries, which is a lot of Lake Victoria. I know a lot of people may have heard of Lake Victoria, so much controversies and good things happening from that side. And we also have aquaculture industry, which is a booming industry that is coming up today. And within this space, we have women who are mostly involved in the space. About 60% of them are women who are engaged and constantly working in this space. And majority of them are involved within the processing, harvesting, trading, and marketing within this area. And for the last couple of years, especially since the new government has come in, I'll mention just a little bit about that and how this ties into the governance of it. There has been a lot of controversies in terms of how the policies of fisheries and agriculture sector has been impacted, from the restructuring of the government to how the policies have been shaped either to positively or negatively impact the fisheries industry and the women in general. Just to give a brief state of affairs within Kenya, this is the interesting part that I also wanted to bring to tie in with this discussion. Last year, in 2024, we had a pivotal moment in Kenya where there was a lot of protest happening done by the youth, Gen Z. This was advertised, it was all over the media, and everybody was hearing about what's happening in Kenya. And this was very, very pivotal for us because the Ruto presidency had a lot of things that were changing in terms of the governance. And some of these things were the introduction of the fisheries manager, the financial bill of 2024, a bill that was meant to change the agriculture sector, the fisheries sector, a lot of economies as we know them today. And the reason why I bring this today is because this was also impacting the young people in terms of how they receive, how they benefit economically from them, and their lack of engagement in how some of the decisions were made within this bill itself. So a lot of protests were happening, a lot of youth came out and protested, saying no to the economic dictatorship that was happening at the time. And this saw many of the industries, and for this particular case, fisheries, being impacted. And for example, the way this was impacted was there were special taxes that were introduced for importation of agricultural produce in Kenya. That meant that any farmer, whether you're a fish farmer or agricultural producer, you would have to buy your raw materials at a higher rate. The cost of production will be very high for you. The cost of food, which is why the youths were protesting last year, would be very, very high. The bread was going up, the sugar was going up. And this is something that just wasn't prior discussed with the general public. It was not like really discussed with the people themselves. And this raise in taxes with about 16% increased how agriculture is done. And when I talk about agriculture, This is growing of coffee, tea, which we export a lot of in Kenya, flowers, and fisheries, which we're starting to slowly produce in Kenya. About 15% of it is coming from aquaculture, which is cage culture farming from Lake Victoria, which most of my experience work comes from. And this also affected a lot of projects that directly impacted women, and particularly women within the fisheries sector and agricultural sector, in terms of what areas were being focused on. There was about 30% of a budget cut that came about. And all this combined with many other things that I have not mentioned brought about this boiling of protest that was happening in Kenya. And this relates so much to my work. For those of you who listened to my dissertation late December, I was talking about how women are organizing on the ground to bring about change as actors of change and moving from just being victims. I'll share how some of those opportunities are coming up. So, of course, like many other African countries, we face many challenges within this sector and broadly within the agriculture sector. Some of which are the high cost of inputs, as the introduction of the bills showed that there would be a 30% increase in the production of food and raw materials. The lack of women and participation and their representation with this decision making, and particularly within policies. And in the case example that I'm giving of the financial bill, women were not involved in this, and the youth were also not involved in this, which brought about many, many challenges. There are also many challenges when it comes to issues of gender-based violence. I have researched and talked about how women, both within their home state and on landy sites in various places in Kenya and Africa as well, are on a day-to-day basis facing gender-based violence. This could be small things like verbal abuse. It could also be things like, harassment as they're trying to access fish, as they're trying to buy these products from, the people who are selling them, which is mostly the men who are selling it to them. There is also lack of infrastructure that is a major challenge within this industry, and this can be compared to many other parts of Africa. And when I talk about infrastructure, of course, there's these things that we know of, roads and hospitals, but when you look at the sector itself, it's basic things like lighting. When you lack something like lighting in a landing site, where women and men are constantly engaging on a daily basis, you're risking a certain group of people to be able to be exposed to many challenges that comes with it. There's also a lot of disparities within the fisheries sector and its governance, and this is the limited access to land, to money, and to be able to access things like fish, for example. And here, especially, I'm talking about for women to be able to access money to invest in their businesses, they need what is called collateral. As I said, Kenya is just a mini example of many African countries are facing this. So, and a lot of women don't have that collateral because collateral requires title deed. And for you to have a title deed, you need to have things like land. And majority of these are owned by men. So you can see how certain group of people is really marginalized here. And finally, I'll touch a final challenge that is facing many African and Kenyan fishery sector, which is privatization and encroachment of spaces that are supposed to be owned by the public, but have been taken over by the few majority who own these big businesses on the landing sites or on coasts, and are preventing a lot of communities from actually benefiting from natural resources like fisheries. Of course, there are many, many opportunities here. I'll start by touching on what I mentioned earlier about the protests that were happening last year. These protests brought about a change. Many people did not realize the power that the youth can have, right? The youth have power to change policy. They have power to change governance system, and this is what happened in Kenya. And particularly, they caused the government to take a pause and relook at the policies that was being implemented, the financial bill in this case, and allow them to rethink about what's happening and pause for a minute. And without the youth being engaged in this way, there would not be any of these changes happening. So the youth and the women have so much power that needs to be utilized. And then Something interesting happens every single time we have new governments coming in. This happens in many countries, including the one we are in right now. We see a restructuring of government, we see dismantling of certain departments, and we see, bringing in people within these departments that may not know anything about it. So this happened within the fisheries sector last year, and they brought in a new CS, this is the cabinet secretary, who was supposed to bring about change within the fisheries sector. And this particular one came from one of the most known areas for coast fisheries, which is Mombasa. And it was expected that with this change in the leadership, that would bring about change in policy and how things are targeted, like some of the projects that are targeted. There is a hope that in the next maybe 5 years that we'll start seeing more changes on addressing some of the issues I've mentioned, such as landing site lighting and sanitation for women and projects as well. We also see a lot of women organizing. This is a part of work that I have been doing for the last, I would say, 13 years, where I have seen women standing up to speak for themselves, women being empowered, women knowing that they are worthy to be able to be listened to. And we have a lot of women who stood up. Some of them are like Presa Women Group, to be able to talk about some of the things that is affecting them and how they can be able to address them. So this is what I call the local governance system. Even though it's not on the top level, we are starting to see changes happening on the ground. Some of the implications of their work is there is a lot of need to be able to consider women as agents of change and actors of change, with women and youth coming up to talk about what is happening and what is wrong with the system, a governance system. We are empowering the youth to be able to be, the youth and the women to be agents of change. We are also empowering the women and the youth to be able to be listened to and heard and be invested in. We invest in the education, we invest in the projects that are mostly supporting them. And finally, understanding gender complexities of governance systems, such as the finance bill that I just talked about earlier. So all these coupled together say that there is hope for Africa. There is hope for Kenya particularly, especially looking at small sectors like the agriculture sector or the fisheries sector, when it comes to local governance system rising up for change and rising up and asking for things to be done different.
Thank you.
Thank you.